The file in front of you was never officially closed. The investigators moved on. The witnesses stopped talking. The leads ran dry, but the case never closed. What you are about to hear has been documented. The timeline, the evidence, the questions that were never answered. Welcome to case number unknown. Let's open the file. On September 25, 1983, 38 convicted IRA prisoners hijacked a food delivery truck, overpowered their guards, and drove straight out the front gate of the most heavily fortified prison in all of Europe. It remains the largest prison escape in British history, and the manhunt that followed would stretch across borders, span decades, and forever change the politics of Northern Ireland. To understand how this happened, you first need to understand what the Maze prison was. Built on the site of a former Royal Air Force base at Long Kesh, just outside Belfast in Northern Ireland, the Maze was no ordinary facility. It was specifically designed to hold paramilitary prisoners during the Troubles, the bloody sectarian conflict that tore Northern Ireland apart for 3 decades. The prison's H-blocks, named for their distinctive shape, were surrounded by 15-foot concrete walls topped with razor wire. Guard towers overlooked every angle. An 18-foot outer perimeter wall encircled the entire complex. Electronic sensors, security gates, and a small army of prison officers made this place, on paper, escape-proof. The British government considered it the most secure prison in Europe. They were wrong. Inside those walls, the Provisional IRA operated with a level of discipline and organization that mirrored a military unit. Prisoners were grouped by paramilitary affiliation, and within H Block 7, the IRA's officer commanding was a man named Larry Marley. Marley was a meticulous planner, a strategist who had spent months studying every routine, every shift change, every vulnerability in the prison's daily operations. He noticed something critical. Every Sunday afternoon, a lorry delivered food supplies to the H blocks. That truck passed through the main gate, through the security checkpoints, and into the heart of the prison. And every Sunday, the same sequence played out with clockwork predictability. Marley realized that if you could control that truck, you could control the gate. And if you controlled the gate, you had your way out. The planning took over a year. Marley, along with fellow prisoners Jerry Kelly, Brendan McFarlane, and Bobby Story, coordinated an operation involving dozens of men across multiple cell blocks. They smuggled 6 handguns into the prison. To this day, exactly how the weapons got inside remains a matter of dispute, but they got in. Prisoners memorized their roles. Timing was rehearsed mentally over and over. Each man knew precisely what he had to do and when he had to do it. There would be no second chances. At 2:30 in the afternoon on that Sunday in September, the operation began. Armed prisoners in H Block 7 simultaneously seized control of the block. They overpowered the prison officers on duty, taking them hostage at gunpoint. The guards were bound, gagged, and locked in cells. One officer was stabbed during the takeover, though he survived. Within minutes, the IRA men controlled the entire block. But taking H Block 7 was only the first step. The real challenge was getting through the front gate. At approximately 3:25, the prison's food delivery lorry arrived at H Block 7 for its scheduled stop. The driver was immediately taken hostage. Prisoners, now dressed in prison officer uniforms and civilian clothing they had gathered over months, loaded themselves into the back of the truck. 38 men climbed aboard. Jerry Kelly took a position in the cab alongside the driver, pressing a gun to his side. The truck began to move toward the main gate, following its normal route, passing through the internal checkpoints. At each stop, the men in stolen uniforms played their parts. They flashed credentials. They waved the truck through. The audacity of it was almost incomprehensible. But at the main tally large gate, the final checkpoint before the outside world, things began to unravel. A prison officer at the gate grew suspicious. Something was not right. Before he could raise the alarm, armed prisoners leaped from the truck and stormed the gatehouse. A violent struggle erupted. Officer James Ferris was shot in the head during the confrontation. He survived, but never fully recovered, suffering the effects of that wound for the rest of his life. Another officer suffered a heart attack during the chaos and died shortly afterward. In the mayhem, the truck stalled at the gate. It would not start again. This was the moment the entire operation could have collapsed. Months of planning, dozens of men exposed in broad daylight at the most fortified prison in Europe, and the getaway vehicle was dead. But the prisoners adapted. They abandoned the truck and stormed through the gate on foot. Outside the walls, a fleet of cars had been arranged by IRA operatives on the outside, waiting along the half-down road. Men sprinted toward the vehicles. Some hijacked cars from passing civilians. The scene was pandemonium. Alarms screamed across the prison complex. Guard towers opened fire. Prisoners scattered in every direction across the open countryside of County Antrim. Within minutes, the British Army, the Royal Ulster Constabulary, and every available security force in Northern Ireland mobilized for what would become one of the largest manhunts in the history of the United Kingdom. Helicopters filled the skies over Belfast. Roadblocks went up on every major route. House-to-house searches began in Republican neighborhoods. The security forces were stunned and humiliated. 38 of the most dangerous convicted terrorists in their custody had just walked out the front door. Of the 38 men who escaped, 19 were recaptured within hours or days. Some were caught at roadblocks. Others were found hiding in fields, ditches, and safe houses in the immediate vicinity. But 19 others vanished completely. They melted into the network of Republican safe houses, sympathetic communities, and cross-border escape routes that the IRA had cultivated over years of conflict. Some made it across the border into the Republic of Ireland, where extradition was a complex and politically fraught process. Others were smuggled further afield to the United States, to continental Europe, beyond the reach of British authorities. The political fallout was seismic. The British government launched an official inquiry led by Sir James Hennessy. His report, published in January 1984, was damning. It found widespread complacency among prison staff, a catastrophic failure of security protocols, and a fundamental underestimation of the prisoners' organizational capability. The prison governor was removed from his post. New security measures were implemented, including watchtowers, dog patrols, and electronic surveillance. But the damage was done. The Mays escape became a propaganda victory for the IRA, a symbol of resistance that galvanized Republican communities and embarrassed the British establishment on the world stage. The fates of the escapees varied dramatically. Jerry Kelly, who had held the gun on the lorry driver and was shot during the breakout, was recaptured in the Netherlands in 1986 after an arms smuggling operation went wrong. He was eventually transferred back to the Mays, where he served additional time before being released under the terms of the 1998 Good Friday Agreement. Kelly went on to become a prominent Sinn Féin politician, serving as a member of the Northern Ireland Assembly. Brendan McFarlane was captured in Amsterdam alongside Kelly. Bobby Storey remained at large for several years before being arrested and returned to prison. He later became a senior figure in Sinn Féin and was widely regarded as one of the most influential Republicans in the North until his death in 2020. Larry Marley, the mastermind who had planned every detail of the escape, never participated in it himself. He had been released from prison before the breakout took place, having served his sentence. But his role was well known. On April 2, 1987, loyalist paramilitaries from the Ulster Volunteer Force shot him dead at his home in the Ardoyne area of North Belfast. He was 41 years old. Some of the escapees were never recaptured. They lived out their lives under assumed names in distant countries. Others returned to paramilitary activity and were eventually killed or imprisoned in subsequent operations. The escape itself became one of the defining events of the Troubles, studied by military strategists and security experts around the world as an example of how determination, planning, and institutional complacency can defeat even the most formidable physical barriers. The Maze prison itself closed in 2000, 2 years after the Good Friday Agreement began the slow process of ending the conflict. Today, its crumbling H-blocks stand empty, a contested heritage site that some want preserved as a museum and others want demolished entirely. The debate over what to do with the Maze mirrors the broader struggle in Northern Ireland over how to remember the Troubles, how to honor the dead on all sides, and how to move forward from decades of violence. 38 men broke out of the most secure prison in Europe in broad daylight. 19 were never brought back. One guard died, others were permanently scarred. The mastermind was assassinated. The political foot soldiers became elected officials. And the question that still lingers over the ruins of the Maze, over the politics of Northern Ireland, over the entire legacy of the Troubles, is this: when does a prison break become an act of war, and who gets to decide which side of that wall is justice? The investigation is ongoing. If you have a case you think deserves a file, leave it in the comments. New files open every week. Subscribe, because the truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how long it takes.